The city hummed. For most people, it was a background noise they learned to ignore. But for the young woman sitting by her open window, it was a living, breathing orchestra. Her name was Elara, and she heard the world in a way few could understand. Elara had never seen the skyline, the busy streets, or the faces of the people passing by her small apartment. She had been blind since birth, but to say she lived in darkness wasn't true. Not at all. Her world was built from sound and touch, and it was vivid, detailed, and full of color. Right now, leaning on the windowsill, she was painting. Not with brushes, but with her attention. The steady rumble clank of the garbage truck 3 blocks over was a deep, earthy brown, like wet soil. The sharp beep of a car locking was a tiny, brilliant yellow spark. The distant laughter of children in the park was a swirling mix of pink and light green. This was how her mind worked. Sounds had colors, textures, even shapes. A high violin note wasn't just a note. It was a slender silver needle. A low cello tone was a warm, wide ribbon of dark blue velvet. She turned her head, her unseeing eyes peaceful. Her ears, sharp and always listening, tracked the familiar click-scrape of a key, finding a lock next door. A moment later, her door opened. Knock, knock, Sunbeam. I come bearing lunch that is definitely not just 2 sandwiches from the deli. It was Leo, her best friend and her guide to the outside world. His voice to Elara was the color of a worn, comfortable leather jacket, a warm, nutty brown with soft edges. I can hear the paper bag crinkling, Leo, and I can smell pastrami. So your secret is safe, she said, a smile touching her lips. Leo was the one who helped her navigate the city. He worked at the community center and had appointed himself her unofficial seeing-eye dog handler, even though he was far more chatty than any dog. He was her bridge to the parts of the world she couldn't touch from her window. So, what's the symphony of the day? He asked, unpacking the food on her small table. The garbage truck is in a melancholy mood today. Very brown. And Mrs. Gable downstairs is practicing her opera again. She's a passionate violet, but she's a little flat. Leo laughed. He never got tired of her descriptions. To him, a sound was just a sound. To Elara, it was a whole story. After lunch, it was time for work. Elara's job was one of the few things that got her out of the apartment and into the flow of the city. Leo walked with her, his arm linked loosely in hers, guiding her with calm, clear directions. Curb coming up. 3 steps down. Okay, clear path for about 20 paces. Their destination was a small, dusty shop called Melodies Keys, tucked between a laundromat and a closed-down bookstore. A bell jingled as they entered, and the smell of old wood, lemon polish, and dusty felt washed over her. This was her favorite smell. Elara. Right on time. Mr. Henderson, the elderly shop owner, had a voice that sounded like dry parchment, a pale, crinkly yellow. I've got a stubborn one in the back. A 1912 upright. Sounds like it's got a chest cold. Elara's face lit up. This was her gift. She could tune a piano by ear with a precision machines sometimes couldn't match. Her fingers, sensitive and knowing, could feel the subtle vibrations in the wood, and her perfect pitch could isolate a single unhappy string in a chorus of 88 notes. Leo helped her to the back room where the old piano stood. She ran her hands over its scarred cabinet, feeling its history in the nicks and scratches. Then she opened the lid, found the middle C, and struck it. The note hung in the air, sour and wavering. To Elara, it wasn't just out of tune. It was a sickly, murky green, like pond scum. She nodded to herself, a doctor diagnosing a patient. For the next 2 hours, the shop was filled with the rhythmic ping of her tuning lever, the testing of chords, and the slow, patient transformation of noise into harmony. Leo sat in a corner, reading, letting her work her magic. Mr. Henderson would occasionally peek in, shaking his head in wonder. As she worked, her mind drifted. Each chord she fixed built a small, beautiful structure in her mind, a castle of clear, bright sound. This was where she felt most powerful, most in control. But tuning other people's pianos was just a job. It paid the rent. Her real passion happened at home, late at night, when the city's hum died down to a whisper. That night, back in her apartment, Leo had gone home. The familiar sounds of her space settled around her, the soft sigh of the refrigerator, the faint tick of her braille clock, the gentle traffic sighing far below. She sat at her electronic keyboard, a good but not extravagant instrument connected to her computer. She took a deep breath and let her fingers rest on the keys. This was her world. Here, she wasn't fixing something broken. She was building something new. She began to play, not a song anyone else had written, but one that grew from the colors in her head. A melody emerged, slow and searching. It was the sound of the first warm breeze of spring, a hesitant, light green tendril of sound. She added lower notes, deep and soft, like the dark, rich earth waking up. Her right hand danced, creating the feeling of sunlight dappling through leaves, little sparkling gold and white notes that flickered in and out. The piece grew, swelled, telling a story without words. It was a story of a hidden garden, of growth unseen but deeply felt, of quiet, profound joy. When she finished, she felt a familiar pang. It was a beautiful loneliness. This music was the truest part of her, and it lived only here, in this room. She had started uploading recordings of these compositions online, under a name no one knew, Keeper of Keys. She had a few listeners, some nice comments, but it felt like sending a message in a bottle, out onto a vast, silent ocean. The next day, Leo came over, his usual easygoing energy replaced by a buzzing excitement she could feel in his quick footsteps. "You will not believe what I saw plastered all over the community center," he said, his voice practically sparkling. He put a stiff piece of paper into her hands. Elara's fingers traced over it. It was a flyer. The paper was thick and expensive. She felt the raised ink of large letters under her fingertips. V.I.K. Viktor Volkov, Leo said, unable to contain himself. Viktor Volkov, the piano superstar, the titan of the keys, or whatever they call him. He's doing it. He's actually holding open auditions for one spot. One full scholarship to his insane, exclusive academy in Switzerland. Elara's heart gave a little thud. She knew the name. Everyone who knew anything about piano did. Volkov was famous for his technical brilliance and his fiery, difficult personality. He was a legend. "Leo, no," she said softly, handing the flyer back as if it were hot. "That's for other people. Conservatory kids, prodigies. It says open auditions, Elara. Open. That means anyone can try. You have to." She shook her head, a wave of insecurity washing over her. "I'm a piano tuner. I play my little songs in my apartment. That stage? It's a different universe. I wouldn't even know how to walk out there." "I'll be right there with you," Leo insisted, his voice softening. He sat next to her. "Listen to me. What you play in this room. It's not little songs. It's the most real music I've ever heard. The world needs to hear it. Not just me, not just the few people online. Really hear it. You deserve that chance." He took her hand and placed it back on the flyer. "Feel that? That's an opportunity. A door. Let's at least walk up to it and see if it opens." Elara sat quietly, her fingers tracing the embossed letters of Viktor Volkov's name. In her mind, she heard the music from the night before, the hidden garden, the dappled light. Could that sound exist in a grand, echoing hall under blinding lights? The thought was terrifying. But under the fear, buried deep, was a tiny, fierce ember of something else. A want. A need to be seen, not with eyes, but with ears and heart. She took a slow, shaky breath. "When is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Leo squeezed her hand, his leather-brown voice warm with pride. "Next Saturday. We have a week to pick your piece." A week. In 7 days, she would step out of her world of sound and color and into the blinding spotlight of the real one. The thought made her stomach twist, but the ember inside her glowed just a little brighter. The morning of the audition arrived with a feeling of tightness in Alara's chest, like a coiled spring. She wore a simple, dark dress, her fingers nervously tracing the fabric. Leo had polished his only pair of dress shoes, and the scent of his nervous sweat mixed with his usual soap. "You've practiced the nocturne 1,000 times," he said, his voice trying for calm, but landing on high-strung. "It's in your bones. Just play it like you do at home." But home was her safe, quiet apartment. This was something else entirely. The concert hall loomed over the street, a giant block of stone and expectation. As Leo guided her through the heavy doors, the air changed. It was cool, dry, and smelled of old velvet, furniture polish, and a faint, clean scent of fear. The quiet was immense, a thick blanket of silence that made the click of her heels on the marble floor sound like gunshots. They found their way to the holding area, a large room buzzing with a different kind of energy. The air was warm and thick with the sound of whispered scales, rustling sheet music, and the low, anxious murmur of competitors. Alara could feel the presence of dozens of people, their tension radiating outwards. She heard the slick, confident sound of someone playing a rapid, difficult passage from a piece she recognized, Rachmaninoff. The notes were flawless, icy, and sharp. To her, they looked like silver daggers. A young man's voice, smooth and polished as the marble floors, cut through the din near her. "I heard Volkov dismissed the first 12 in under a minute. Just stops them mid-bar. Says he can tell everything from the first phrase." A girl's voice, tight with nerves, replied. "They say he's looking for power, for command." A definitive sound. Alara felt a cold trickle of dread. Her sound wasn't about command. It was about feeling. She sank a little lower in her chair, her hand finding the warm fur of her guide dog's head for comfort. One by one, names were called by a tired-sounding assistant. Each time, there was a rustle of movement, a held breath, and then the distant, muffled sound of piano music from behind the heavy doors to the main stage. The music was always cut short, always followed by a terrible, echoing silence before the next name was called. It was a conveyor belt of broken hopes. Alara. Her name bounced off the high ceilings. Leo squeezed her arm. "Ready, Sunbeam?" She wasn't, but she stood. Leo guided her to the stage door, where the assistant, a woman with a voice like thin paper, gave terse instructions. "Straight ahead, 15 paces to the bench. The piano is centered. You may begin when ready." Then the door opened. The wave of sound that hit her was almost physical. It was the sound of vast, empty space, a cavernous silence filled with hundreds of small, human noises, coughs, shifting programs, the creak of seats. The air was different here, cooler, smelling of dust and distant perfumes. Leo gave her arm one last press and let go, staying in the wings. She was alone. Using her cane, she began the long walk. The floor was smooth wood. Her footsteps, which had been so loud in the hallway, were swallowed by the hungry quiet of the hall. She felt countless eyes on her, felt the surprise, the curiosity, maybe even the pity, as a low murmur rippled through the audience. She kept walking, counting her steps. 12, 13, 14. Her shin gently bumped the bench. She found it with her hand, orienting herself. She carefully placed her cane on the floor, sat, and smoothed her dress. This was the moment. She needed to know this piano, this unfamiliar instrument under the hot, bright lights she could feel on her skin. It was her ritual, her necessity. She raised her hands and gently, softly, played a C major scale. The sound was good, bright, clear, a column of pure white light. But it felt different under her fingers than her keyboard at home. The action was heavier. She played a few chords, listening to how the sound bloomed and faded in this huge room. She was mapping it, learning its geography. To her, these weren't just random notes. They were a quick, intuitive sketch, a flowing series of connected sounds that her sensitive ears used to build a picture of the space. It lasted maybe 7 seconds dot from the darkness in front of her. A voice snapped out. It was a voice used to being heard, deep, resonant, and dripping with impatience. It was the color of tarnished brass. Time is a luxury, young lady. We are here to listen to art, not a sound check. Begin your piece properly, or make room for someone who can. The audience froze. Then a wave of nervous laughter and whispers washed over her. Ilara's hands, which had been feeling their way into the music, turned to ice. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The map she was drawing in her mind shattered. All her preparation, the safe place she went to when she played, vanished. Flustered, her face burning, she placed her hands for the Chopin Nocturne. She took a breath that felt like shards of glass in her lungs, and began. The first few bars were okay, though tighter than usual. The melody, meant to be a gentle, sad moonbeam of blue-silver, came out thin and pale. She could feel the judgment from the darkness, the weight of Volkov's glare. Her focus, usually so inward, was splintered. She was thinking about the audience, about his words, about the vast, exposing space dot. Then came a tricky turn, a run of notes that required a light, confident touch. Her cold, stiff fingers fumbled. One note was clipped, the next came in too loud and hard, a clumsy, discordant thump that stood out like a wrong-colored tile in a perfect mosaic dot. She didn't even get to correct it. Enough. The brass voice rang out, cold and final. Her hands jerked away from the keys as if shocked. Sentiment without precision is merely noise, Volkov declared, his words cutting through the hall. You play as if you are in a fog, feeling for shapes you cannot see. This stage requires clarity. It requires vision. True musical vision. Next. For a second, there was absolute silence. Then the rustling began, the uncomfortable shifting, the low murmur of the crowd. The heat of humiliation spread from Ilara's face down her neck, covering her whole body. She was frozen on the bench, blinded by the lights and a shame so deep it felt like a physical weight. A gentle hand touched her shoulder. Leo, he had come out from the wings. His voice, when he spoke, was low and thick with a fury he was trying to contain. Come on, let's go. He guided her shaking hand to her cane, helped her up. She stumbled on the first step, the world a dizzying mix of hot tears and choking silence. The long walk back across the stage felt 1,000 miles long. Every whisper from the audience was a needle. The door to the wings finally closed behind them, muting the sound, but not the feeling. Back in the holding area, the other competitors avoided her. Their silence was different. Now not the silence of shared anxiety, but of awkward pity. Leo led her straight through, out a side door, and into a narrow, concrete service hallway. It was cold and smelled of cleaning supplies. Once the heavy door clicked shut, blocking out the world of the audition, Ilara's composure broke. She leaned against the cold wall, a sob wrenching itself from her throat. He didn't even let me finish, she choked out. He said I was in a fog. Leo put his arms around her, his own body tense with anger. "He's a proud, foolish man," he said, his voice shaking. He heard one stumble. He didn't listen to the music behind it. He doesn't know anything. But the words felt hollow. Volkov's verdict, delivered to a packed hall, felt like a public sentence. It confirmed every fear she'd ever had, that her private world of color and sound was just that private, that it couldn't survive in the harsh, bright light of the real world where people like Viktor Volkov made the rules. The dream of the academy, of being heard, dissolved into the cold air of the service hallway, leaving behind only the bitter taste of shame and the echoing sound of a voice the color of tarnished brass, telling her she was blind to the very thing she loved most. The service hallway door swung shut with a final, heavy click, sealing Elara and Leo into a world of concrete and humming fluorescent lights. The grand sounds of the concert hall were gone, replaced by the dull roar of a building's inner workings. Elara slumped against the cold wall, the smooth stone the only solid thing in a world that had just tilted off its axis. Leo's arm was around her shoulders, a steady pressure. "Breathe, just breathe," he was saying, his voice low and tight. "That man, he's a performance, a circus act. He doesn't know what he just heard." But Elara couldn't hear reassurance. All she could hear was the echo. Asterisk, true musical vision. The words weren't just an insult. They were a verdict. They took the one thing that made her world whole, her unique way of experiencing music, and twisted it into a weakness. A fog, a lack. She let Leo guide her out of the building, through the alleys and back to her apartment. The city sounds, usually so full of color and life, were just noise now, a gray, blurry static. She didn't speak. Leo, sensing she needed silence, just made her a cup of tea. The clink of the mug on her table, a small, lonely sound. For 2 days, she moved through her apartment like a ghost. She didn't touch her keyboard. The memory of her fumbling fingers on the concert grand was too raw, too recent. She canceled her tuning jobs, telling Mr. Henderson she was unwell, which wasn't a lie. She felt sick, a deep, soul-sick weariness. The online world of Keeper of Keys felt like a childish fantasy. What was the point of sending her bottled messages into the silent ocean if the shore was manned by people like Volkov? On the 3rd evening, she was sitting in her armchair, her guide dog's head resting on her feet, when Leo's phone buzzed with a sound she'd never heard from it before. Rapid, insistent series of pings. "Whoa," Leo muttered. Then, "Holy, Elara, what is it?" Her voice was flat, tired. "It's your channel. The Keeper of Keys channel. The notifications are going crazy." She shook her head. "It's probably spam. Or someone left a mean comment. I don't want to know. No, it's not like that. The numbers, they're huge." She heard the frantic swiping of his fingers on his screen. "There's a link everywhere. People are sharing something." He was quiet for a long moment, just listening. Then he said, "It's a video." "Well, not a video. It's just a black screen." "But the audio." His voice trailed off in disbelief. "Play it," she whispered. A confusing thread of dread and curiosity pulling at her dot, he tapped the screen. A familiar, horrible sound filled the room. The muffled noise of the grand hall. Her own hesitant footsteps. The rustle of her dress as she sat. Then her voice, small and shaky, as she'd whispered to herself, "Okay." And then the first flawed notes of the Chopin Nocturne. Elara flinched, turning her head away. "Turn it off, please." "Wait," Leo said, his voice urgent. "Just listen to the comments. People aren't laughing." He began to read, his voice shifting from shock to a growing, fierce excitement. "This isn't a performance. It's a heartbeat. You can hear her fear turn into trying, and it's more honest than any perfect recording. Who is this? That stumble at 1:32. It shattered me. That's the sound of a real person, not a robot. The way the melody hesitates, like it's remembering something sad. I've never heard Chopin sound like this. He scrolled further. They're calling it the unseen audition. Someone recorded the audio from the audience and posted it. They stripped the video because they said the music should be heard without prejudice, without seeing her. It's got over 2 million listens, Ilara. She sat perfectly still, trying to process it. The world hadn't heard a polished performance. They'd heard a struggle. They'd heard her fear, her hope, her crushing defeat. And instead of scorn, they were responding with a wave of stunned empathy. They were listening past the stumble, into the heart she hadn't been able to fully hide. Her phone, lying on the table beside her, vibrated with a different tone. It was an email alert for her private account, the one only a handful of people knew. "Leo," she said, her voice thin. "My phone. Can you?" He picked it up. "It's from..." It looks like a personal address. The subject line says, "From the stage manager." Read it. He cleared his throat. "Dear Ilara, I was the stage manager for the Volkov auditions. What happened to you on that stage was the most unprofessional, cruel thing I have witnessed in 20 years of this work. I have been unable to sleep for thinking about it. I may lose my job for sending this, but you deserve to have it." Volkov left his personal recording device on the judge's table. It recorded every audition. The attached file is the full, unedited recording of yours. It contains a few seconds before his interruption. Please listen. The world heard a fragment. You should hear the whole truth. I am so sorry. There was a long silence, broken only by the gentle whir of the laptop fan. A file had been downloaded. Should I? Leo asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ilara nodded, her mouth dry. Leo opened the file. The audio quality was clearer, more intimate. It picked up her breathing. They heard the shuffle as she settled, the tiny creak of the bench. Then, the sound of her fingers not starting the nocturne, but doing what she always did. The soft, exploratory run of notes. It wasn't a standard scale. It was a flowing, rippling cascade, a whisper of sound that danced from the low register to the high and back again. It was instinctive, a painter testing her brushes on a fresh canvas, a bird testing the wind before flight. To a casual listener, it was just a warm-up. But to Ilara, and to anyone who truly listened, it was a fleeting, beautiful secret. It lasted 7 seconds. In those 7 seconds, her fear was gone, replaced by pure, intuitive conversation with the instrument. The notes formed original melody, a bittersweet little sigh of a tune that appeared and vanished like a ghost. The recording ended with the brutal crack of Volkov's voice. Asterisk, time is a luxury, young lady. Asterisk, the room was silent. Leo let out a long, shaky breath. He cut you off after that, he said, wonder and anger mixing in his voice. He heard that little bit of magic, and he called it a sound check. Something hard and cold in Ilara's chest began to thaw, replaced by a different heat. It wasn't just hurt anymore. It was a sense of profound injustice, not just for herself, but for the music itself. That tiny, 7-second phrase was a pure expression of her world. It was the color of early morning mist over water-soft grays and cool, shimmering blues. And he had dismissed it as nothing. Over the next 24 hours, the story grew legs. Music bloggers and critics, already fascinated by the unseen audition, got hold of the warm-up clip. An article popped up with the headline, "The 7-Second Genius Volkov Missed." A respected, elderly composer was quoted saying, "What the maestro mistook for technical preparation was, in fact, a moment of sublime musicality. It was the key to understanding the artist. He threw the key away. The public outrage towards Volkov became a real storm. His social media was flooded. Comments shifted from "that was harsh" to "you are deaf to true talent." News outlets picked up the story of the blind pianist and the infamous maestro's fog comment. Volkov's team, clearly in damage control mode, issued a statement. It appeared on his website. Leo read it to Alara, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Maestro Volkov maintains the highest standards of artistic excellence for his academy. The audition process is designed to be rigorous and discerning, assessing not only feeling but the technical command necessary to sustain a professional career. He stands by his professional assessment while regretting any personal distress caused. He regrets my distress? Alara said, the heat in her voice surprising even her. Not his blindness. Not his mistake. My distress. That's corporate talk for, I'm not sorry, but you're making me look bad. Leo grumbled. Then another email arrived. This one was from a producer for a popular international daytime talk show. Global Conversation. The host, known for tackling viral stories, wanted to have a dialogue about music, perception, and talent. They were inviting both Alara and, ostensibly, Viktor Volkov. They want a spectacle, Leo said, immediately suspicious. They want you two in the same room to rehash the fight. Alara thought about it. She thought about the gray fog of the past few days. She thought about the millions who had heard her stumble and found beauty in it. She thought about the 7-second truth on that recording, the real her that Volkov had silenced. She was tired of being defined by a fragment, by a failure, by a fog. She straightened her shoulders. No, she said, her voice firmer than it had been in days. They don't want a spectacle. They want a conversation. She turned toward Leo, a new, quiet determination settling on her face. So let's give them one. Let's finish what I started on that stage. Tell them I'll go. The green room of the Global Conversation studio felt like a doctor's waiting room, but with better snacks and a thicker layer of tension. Alara sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. She could hear the distant, muffled thump of the studio audience being warmed up, a cheerful voice telling jokes that landed with an echo. Leo paced nearby, the soft shush of his shoes on the carpet marking his nervous path. You don't have to do this, he said for what felt like the 20th time. We can still walk out the back. They can't make you sit there with him. He's not here yet, Alara said, her voice calm. It was true. The maestro's team had arranged a separate holding area. They were to be brought out separately, a theatrical choice by the producers. And I'm not sitting with him. I'm sitting across from him. There's a difference. A production assistant with a voice like a perky bird chirped at the door. 5 minutes, Alara. We'll mic you up now. Small, skilled hands fitted a tiny microphone pack to the back of her dress and clipped a slender mic near her collar. Just speak normally. It'll pick you right up. As they finished, the air in the corridor outside shifted. Alara heard a new set of footsteps, firm, sharp, and accompanied by a low murmur of respectful voices. She caught a few words. Unprecedented, maestro. Gracious of you. Clarify the narrative. Then, the tarnished brass voice of Viktor Volkov, closer than she'd ever heard it, saying, Let us get this over with. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. He was here. The walk to the set was a blur of directions and guiding touches. She was led to a plush chair. The studio lights were hot and bright, a physical pressure on her skin. The audience was a living, breathing entity just beyond the lights. She could feel their collective gaze, their held breath. Across from her, she heard the rustle of expensive fabric as Volkov took his seat. She could smell his cologne, something sharp and woody, like an old, unopened library. The host, a woman whose voice was smooth and professionally warm, like poured honey, began. She welcomed everyone, explained the conversation that had captivated the world, and played the now infamous clip of the audition. Hearing it broadcast in this public, electric space made Ilara want to shrink into her chair. The stumble, which felt like a private wound, was aired for all to dissect once more. When it finished, the host turned to Volkov. "Maestro, your critique of sentiment without precision sparked a global debate. Many felt it was unnecessarily harsh, given the circumstances. How do you respond to that?" Volkov's voice filled the studio, confident, accustomed to authority. "Art is not a charity. My academy, my stage, exists to find and hone the finest instruments. Precision is the vessel that carries feeling. Without it, the deepest emotion spills out, lost and formless. What you heard was a lack of control. My duty is to the art itself, not to the transient feelings of the moment." His words were a wall. He was hiding behind the bricks of standards and duty. Ilara felt a flicker of the old shame, but beneath it, that new heat of injustice began to burn. The host then played the second, clipped the 7-second warm-up from his own recording. The beautiful, intuitive ripple of notes floated through the studio, then was cut off by his own impatient voice on the tape. "Maestro," the host pressed, her tone gentle but pointed, listening now to that brief moment before the official piece. Many respected musicians have called it a flash of pure instinctive genius. Did that moment, in your professional opinion, show a control and a musicality that perhaps you missed in the pressure of the live audition? There was a beat of silence. Ilara could almost hear Volkov's mind working, searching for a defensible position. "A skilled technician tests the instrument," he said, but his brass voice had lost a little of its shine. "It is a matter of routine. It does not change the fundamental failure of execution that followed." He was dismissing it again, calling her truth a routine. The heat in Ilara's chest rose into her throat. She wasn't sure she could speak, but the host was turning to her. "Ilara, you've heard the maestro's perspective. The world has heard your audition. What is your response?" All the sound in the studio seemed to suction away. The only thing left was the pounding of her own heart in her ears. She felt Leo, somewhere in the wings, holding his breath. She felt Volkov's impatience radiating from across the space. She felt the hope and curiosity of the millions listening. She leaned slightly toward the microphone at her collar. Her voice, when it came out, was quieter than the host's, softer than Volkov's, but it didn't shake. It was clear, like water over stones. "You hear in black and white, maestro." A total, stunned silence gripped the set. Even the host seemed momentarily speechless. Ilara continued, each word finding its shape. "You see the sheet music as a set of instructions, a map to a destination you already know." She turned her head slightly, orienting herself toward the sound of his breathing. "For me, music isn't a map. It's a landscape. I don't follow the path. I feel the wind. I taste the air. I know where the rivers are because I hear them running. That warm-up you heard, that was me learning the shape of the hills in that room on that day." She took a steadying breath. The silence was so deep now, she could hear the faint hum of the lights. "You asked for precision. My precision is in knowing the exact shade of blue in a minor chord. It's in knowing how the vibration of a low F feels like dark honey in my fingertips." You said I played like I was in a fog. For the first time, a trace of emotion thickened her voice. "It wasn't a fog, maestro. It was a different kind of light. One you don't know how to see by." She paused, letting the words hang in the hot, bright air. The audience hadn't made a sound. This wasn't the spectacle they'd expected. This was something else. "Would you let me show you?" Ilara asked, the question simple, direct, and utterly devastating. Not the piece I failed then, but the landscape I live in now? A producer somewhere must have been frantically signaling, because the host quickly said, We? We have a piano on stage. Maestro Volkov? Would you consent to hear Alara play now? For a long, terrible moment, there was no answer. Alara imagined his proud face, caught in a trap of his own making. To refuse would seem petty, fearful. To agree was a risk. The rustle of fabric came again. She heard him shift in his seat. A true artist, he said, his voice strained, is always willing to listen. It was not an apology. It was a challenge. But it was permission. Stage hands moved quietly. Alara was guided from her chair, led the few steps to the sleek concert grand placed at the center of the stage. As she sat, the world narrowed. The hot lights, the waiting audience, the brooding presence of Volkov, all of it faded into a distant murmur. Here, under her hands, was a new world to explore. She let her fingers drift over the keys, not playing, just feeling their cool smoothness. She played a single soft middle C dot. The note bloomed in the studio, a pure, round tone. It was a good piano, different from the one at the audition. This one had a voice that was brighter, more silvery. She listened to the note fade, learning its life. Then she settled. She didn't announce her piece. She just let her hands find their starting place, and she began. The first notes were so soft, they were almost just a thought. They were the deep, quiet grays of the hour before dawn, a single, slow melody emerging like a shape from mist. Her left hand laid down a foundation of chords that didn't sound like standard harmony. They sounded like the earth itself, deep and resonant and alive. She called the piece Dawn Over Silent Walls. It was the story of her last few days. The loneliness was there, in the searching, hesitant phrases. But then, a change. A single high note, repeated like the first call of a distant bird. A spark of gold dot, her right hand began to move faster, not in a showy run, but in a shimmering, cascading pattern that sounded like sunlight hitting dew, breaking into 1,000 little rainbows. The music began to swell, not with angry power, but with a relentless, gentle hope. You could hear the walls in the title, the isolation, the confinement, but you could hear them being gently, steadily, overcome by light and growth. She wasn't just playing notes. She was having a conversation with the instrument, pulling colors from it that seemed to defy physics. Her body swaying slightly as she shaped the sound. Completely lost in the world, she was painting for everyone to hear dot in the wings. Leo had tears streaming silently down his face. He wasn't looking at Alara. He was looking at Viktor Volkov. The maestro sat frozen. His arrogant posture had collapsed. He was leaning forward, his mouth slightly open, his eyes, for the first time, wide open and unguarded. All the sternness, all the disdain, had been washed away by the tide of sound. He looked like a man who had been speaking a single, rigid language all his life and had just heard poetry in a tongue he never knew existed. He was not just listening. He was witnessing. He was seeing, for the first time, the landscape. The final note hung in the air of the studio, not a sharp ending, but a slow, warm fade, like the last glow of sunset absorbed by a calm sea. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but full crammed with the echo of what had just happened. Then, the air broke dot. It wasn't just applause. It was a physical wave of sound, a release of breath and emotion from the audience that hit Alara like a warm wind. They were on their feet, the rustle and thunder of it overwhelming. She could hear shouts, not just polite clapping, but real cries of yes. And beautiful, and wordless exclamations. She sat very still at the piano, her hands resting gently on the keys that still seemed to vibrate with the story she told. The heat of the lights on her skin felt different now, not like an interrogation, but like an embrace dot in the wing. Leo was wiping his face with his sleeve, a choked laugh escaping him. He wasn't clapping. He was just watching her, his chest swollen with a pride so fierce it hurt. But the world had narrowed to the space between the piano and the guest chair. Slowly, Alara turned her head. She couldn't see, but she could feel. The spotlight of attention had shifted. It was no longer on her. It was on the man sitting across the stage. Viktor Volkov had not moved. He hadn't joined the standing ovation. He sat as if carved from stone, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. The cameras, sensing the real story, zoomed in. The proud, sharp lines of his face had gone soft with shock. His eyes, usually narrowed in critical assessment, were wide, fixed on the space where Alara sat. He looked like a man who had been shown a hidden door in a room he'd lived in for 60 years. The host, visibly moved, tried to speak into the microphone, but her voice was lost in the tumult. She gestured for quiet, and slowly, gradually, the applause subsided back into that thick, expectant hush. Everyone could feel it. Something had to be said. The ball of judgment was no longer in Volkov's court. It had been returned to him, transformed into something he didn't know how to hold. The host opened her mouth to pose a question, but Volkov raised a hand. A simple, slow gesture that asked for the room. He stood up. The sound of his chair scraping back was loud in the quiet. He didn't walk toward the host. He didn't address the audience. He walked, his steps slow and deliberate, toward the piano. Toward Alara. Alara heard him coming. The measured footsteps on the stage floor. The slight shift in the air as he stood before her. She kept her hands in her lap, her head tilted up, waiting. The studio was so silent, you could hear the hum of the lights. He stood there for a long moment, just looking at her. Then, he did something no one expected. He bent at the waist in a slow, deep, old-world bow. Not a nod. A full, formal bow of respect when he straightened. His voice, when it came, was unrecognizable. The tarnished brass was gone. It was raw, scratchy, stripped bare. It was barely above a whisper, but in the dead silence, and amplified by the sensitive stage microphones, every word carried to the far corners of the room and the millions of homes watching. "I have spent my entire life," he began, each word heavy with the weight of its own admission, looking at the keys. He paused, swallowing hard, studying them, mastering them, believing that if I could conquer every note, every technique, I would find the soul of the music. He took a shaky breath, his gaze never leaving her. I was listening for perfection, for a sound that matched the picture in my head. I confused the map for the world. His voice broke slightly. For the first time, I have heard the horizon. He looked down at his own hands, then back at her. You asked me about precision. You have a precision I could never dream of. The precision of the heart, of a true seer. He took one more step closer, his voice dropping even further, meant almost for her alone. But the lapel mic at her collar caught it and sent it ringing out, clear and profound. I was the one in the fog. And for that, I am deeply and forever sorry. He did not offer excuses. He did not mention his academy or his standards. He simply stood there, a titan brought low by beauty, offering his apology like a gift. Alara felt the words settle over her. The heat of her anger, the cold knot of shame, they dissolved, leaving behind a strange, quiet peace. She nodded slowly, accepting not just his apology, but the truth in it. "Thank you for listening," she said, her voice soft but clear. The audience erupted again, but this time it was different, softer, filled with a collective sigh of catharsis. The host, wiping a tear from her eye, finally found her voice. I think we have all heard something historic today. But the story wasn't over. It was just beginning its new chapter. In the days that followed, the video of Elara's performance and Volko's apology became a global sensation. This wasn't just a viral clip. It was a cultural moment. It was discussed in music conservatories and coffee shops, on news panels and social media. The narrative flipped entirely. It was no longer blind girl mocked by maestro. It was the girl who made the maestro see. Offers poured in, but they were different now. They weren't offers based on pity or a good story. A major symphony orchestra invited her to premiere an original composition with them. A renowned music producer, known for working with innovative artists, wanted to collaborate on an album of her soundscapes. A prestigious university, different from Volkov's academy, offered her a residency to explore and teach her unique approach to musical perception. Volkov, true to his transformed self, did something extraordinary. He publicly rescinded the scholarship offer from his own academy. In a written statement, he said, "To place Elara in my academy would be to confine a forest to a vase. Her path must be her own." Instead, he used his considerable influence and personal funds to establish a new grant, not for a single student, but for a program that would pair young blind or visually impaired musicians with established composers and technologists to explore and develop new languages of music. He named it simply the Horizon Fund. He asked Elara not to run it, but to be its first guiding advisor. Elara, with Leo's steady help, navigated the new landscape. She said no to more than she said yes. She took the residency, finding joy in explaining her world of color and shape to wide-eyed students. She began work on the album, but on her terms. In her own time, one crisp autumn afternoon, she was in a recording studio, a space designed for perfect sound. She had just finished laying down a gentle, intricate piece inspired by the sound of rustling leaves. The sound engineer, a man who had worked with legends, sat in his booth, silent. After a long moment, his voice came over the talkback, thick with emotion. That was, "I've never heard anything like that. It's like you're not even playing my instrument. You're playing the air in the room." Elara smiled. In the control room, Leo grinned, giving her a thumbs up she couldn't see, but somehow knew was there. As they walked home through the park, Leo described the world to her, the fiery red and orange of the leaves, the deep blue of the autumn sky. Elara listened, then lifted her face to the sun. "I can hear that blue," she said softly. "It's a low, clear hum, like a cello string touched by sunlight." She reached out and took Leo's arm. "And the leaves? They're a dry, whispering gold. Come on, let's go home. I think I know how to play it." She wasn't walking toward a stage to prove herself anymore. She was walking through her world, ready to translate its endless, beautiful colors into sound for anyone willing to listen not just with their ears, but with their hearts. The horizon, after all, was endless.